Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Kresy Family webinar on the Polish eastern borderlands of Kresy, in which we hope to be able to share with you how you can trace the archives of the family members of people of interest who were deported from the Kresy region during the Second World War. Before we start, I'd like to just share some housekeeping rules. I'd like to bring to your attention that the webinar is being recorded, and therefore if you don't wish for your camera or image to be shown, feel free to turn off your camera. And similarly, you can choose to take out your name by clicking the three dots. If you just hover over your little window and click the three dots, you have the option to change your name, and there you can sort of change it to just your initials or just leave it blank. Furthermore, I'd just like to point out everyone is muted, and this is just to prevent background noise. However, please do feel free to put comments or questions in the chat box, as we will be taking questions throughout the webinar. And so please do put them there so that our team can see them and address them. My name is Marysia Suchcitz, and I was born in London, but currently living in Warsaw, and I have studied history both at undergraduate and at master's level. I'm very passionate and interested in Polish history, particularly as my grandparents were born in Poland and ended up in the UK following the events of the Second World War, and so Polish history has been something that's always been very close to my heart. Today's event is sponsored by the Polish Embassy in London, and so we'd really like to extend our gratitude to the Polish Embassy and for accepting this webinar as part of the Polish Heritage Days project. This is the first of two webinars. Today we will be discussing and tracing pre-war Polish records and deportations. And the second webinar, which will be taking place on the 19th of June, will be covering the records after post-deportation. And we are extremely excited to have over 100 of you joining us today from all over the globe. We had registrations from over 14 different countries, and these included places as far-flung as Argentina, Azerbaijan, participants from Italy, Kenya, France, Poland, UK, Canada, USA, and many others. And so we're really happy to and glad to have you here with us today. And we hope that for those of you who might be just at the beginning of your journey, tracing your family history, or whether you're already quite far into the interesting sort of following your archival family history, that for everyone, you'll find something that will be of use, and we welcome you all here. Just to give you a running order of how today's webinar will take place, the first part I'll be giving a 10-15 minute brief overview of the history of the start of the Second World War right through to the amnesty and the sort of escape or leaving of the Soviet Union via Persia. With the Anders Army. This will just be a short sort of overview for those who maybe are not as familiar with this history, but also to sort of give us a bit of a background. And following that, the main part of the webinar will be carried out by Janusz Zajączkowski, who will be telling you where you can find the various archives, which websites, which resources are best to use. And after that, we'll be taking questions and hoping to answer those for you as well. There will be a short question and answer session in the middle of Janusz's presentation in case you have any questions sort of relating to the first half of Janusz's presentation. More details can be found on the Kresy Family website, and I do encourage you to have a look at this website after, if you haven't done so yet, after the webinar, where there is a wealth of materials, and also you can find out more about the history of Kresy, both pre, during and post-war, and hopefully if you have any questions which are not answered, you can find the answers there. So starting with brief history. we could start with the beginning of the Second World War, but actually the fate of how Poland would be divided during the war actually started just before that with the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, which was signed on the 23rd of August, 1939. This pact between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany solidified the two as allies and was a pact of non-aggression. It also held a secret protocol. The secret protocol essentially divided Central Europe between the two powers. And within that, Poland, which would be split effectively almost down the middle, with Nazi Germany taking the west of Poland and the Soviet Union taking the east. The war began on the 1st of September 1939 with the invasion of Nazi Germany at Westerplatte. And then on the 17th of September of that same year, the Soviet Union began their invasion from the east. This took Poland by surprise, and a country which was already fighting a big campaign to the west of their borders was suddenly having to face occupiers to the east. On the 22nd of September, there's a moment where the pact between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany was realized, and Poland essentially was occupied by two powers. The Kresy region was the part which fell under the Soviet Union's sphere, and this is the sort of focus where we'll be focusing on the further history of the fate of those who found themselves in the Kresy and in the Soviet Union's part of the occupation. It's worth noting now that today, a lot of the Kresy region actually fall in what is now Lithuania, Ukraine, and Belarus. And so they're no longer part of the current day Poland's current borders. So following Soviet invasion, very quickly the Soviet Union began carrying out their policy of Sovietization. As part of this, the officers and soldiers who had been fighting against the Red Army were captured and imprisoned. Many were taken to the Far East and were held in prisoner of war camps such as Kozielsk, Ostashkov, and Starobielsk. Later in 1940, on the order of Stalin, over 22,000 Polish elite were systematically murdered by the Soviet NKVD killing squads, shot in the back of the head and buried in large mass graves in the forests of Katyn, Yednoye, Kharkov, and Bukowina. Within those 22,000 killed were not only Polish officers of high ranks, but were also teachers, civil servants, academics, and essentially the elite and intelligentsia of Polish society. This very much fell in with the Soviets' policy of trying to rid Poland of its identity, of its possibility to basically stand up and to basically demolish Polish society. Following this as well, it was not only the military personnel who were captured and deported by the Soviets, but deportations were actually also carried out on civilians. Families were taken from their homes in the middle of the night, given very little time to prepare or pack, and then would be transported to the closest railway station and packed into waiting trains. The waiting trains were basically made up of trucks, cattle trucks, where the conditions were very bad. And within these trucks, the families would be deported to the Far East, on which they would spend, these journeys could last anything from a month onwards. Essentially within these trucks, what you'd have would be two shelves which would serve as beds, maybe a small stove in the middle, as well as a hole which would be used as a toilet. Slightly bigger carts, which would hold up to 70 people, might have two stoves. However, the conditions were so bad that many would die en route during the journey. After the arrival at the end destination in the Far East, the families and those deported would have to then travel by foot, sledge, or cart to their final place of deportation. This also meant that the endpoint where they would arrive on the train would not necessarily be the endpoint where the families would then ultimately be sent to to these special settlements. We see that there are 4 phases of the deportations. They began on the 10th of February 1940 with families of settlers, the Osadnicy, policemen, foresters, civil servants and government officials being the main people arrested and deported. In April 1940, these were the families of the officers and ex-officers, many who had already been killed in the Katyn massacres. In June 1940, these were principally refugees from German-occupied Poland who had refused Soviet passports, including intellectuals and professionals. And in June 1941, there were Polish citizens from the Baltic states and any who had been previously missed. Altogether, it's very difficult to pin down an exact number of how many people were deported. Various historians have given various numbers, but 1.7 million tends to be on the higher end of the scale. The recent studies suggest that it was probably closer to a million Poles, a million people from the Polish territories of Kresy who were deported to the Far East. Unfortunately, we will never know just how many people were deported, as not everything was documented, and obviously not everyone survived. And now we're showing you a map just to show the large scale of where everyone was, to the various parts of the Soviet Union where these deportations took place. The dark red parts of this map show the areas where there were gulags and prisoner of war camps. Here it would be military personnel and any officers who had not been killed during the massacres who would be taken here. Here they would work very hard. Conditions obviously were absolutely terrible, and many would die in the gulags. The shaded parts of the areas are where the settler camps were set up, and this is where a lot of the family and civilians who were deported ended up. As you can see, there was no one place in the Soviet Union where these camps were located. Rather, they were spread across the whole of the Soviet Union, ranging from the very north near the Arctic Circle to the south nearer to Central Asia. This also gives a good sort of image of into how many unknown places the Poles were deported. Once the families had arrived at their point of deportation, they would be set up in settlement camps, also known as poszolki. Here they would be living in barracks and in small huts, again, where the conditions were not very good, taking into consideration the harsh winters in the Soviet Union. This made basically survival very difficult. Everyone would be forced to work. This could include logging and working on railways, building works, foresting, and so forth. Children would be sent to Soviet schools, to Russian schools, and this was part of the policy of Sovietization and the idea of indoctrinating children and trying to get them to essentially leave behind or lose their Polish identity. Older children tended to work alongside the adults. This is because food would be only provided to those who worked, and taking into consideration the harsh conditions, the more people from a family or in a group who could work, it meant the more food that family would have in order on which they could survive. However, many young children and as well as adults died during their times in the specposzolki and would have to be buried and left sort of in the settler camps there. Furthermore, obviously medical conditions were not very good, and those with weakening over time from the hard work and the lack of food, disease and illnesses were very common. And unfortunately, from the million that were deported, a vast majority did not make it out of the Soviet Union. The turning point came with the invasion of Germany, of the moment when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941. This led to the Soviet Union joining the Allies and becoming part of the Allied powers. For Poland, and particularly the Polish government in exile, which at this time was based in London, this was a very difficult moment, as suddenly occupier who had come in and caused so much damage, including the deportations, and had killed mass numbers of Poles, was suddenly standing by them and were meant to be considered as an ally. On the 30th of July, the Sikorski-Majski Agreement was signed, which granted the so-called amnesty to Poles. It was decided that Poles who found themselves in gulags in the Spetsposiolki would be permitted to meet and journey down to the south of Russia in order to be able to leave. However, this within itself became a huge journey and a huge challenge. The journey itself from the various settlement camps was not easy. There were not enough trains. Furthermore, there were very difficult conditions, and people who were already very weak, susceptible to illness, underfed, undernourished, many of those who started the journey did not make it. Obviously, their bodies could not be taken with the groups who were traveling, and so therefore many who died along the way to meet Anders and Anders's army were left behind in either unmarked graves or graves which would be later never would be forgotten, or people did not know that they were there. The journey, for some, the journey was also longer depending on where they were traveling from, and with the uncertainty of how many trains there were going and when they were going, many either missed trains or groups became separated. Some who were journeying to join the army as well would actually have to work in camps along the way, where the situations, where the conditions and the situation and the conditions would be far worse as well. And so therefore, while this amnesty granted some hope, at the actual moment of getting to the Anders army, getting to that point of evacuation was not easy. In March and August of 1942, the evacuation with the Anders army across the sea to Persia began. Roughly 115,000 people were evacuated with Anders's army. This included civilians as well as military personnel. Others would go on to join the Polish Berlin army. All were repatriated to Poland after 1946 onwards, which shows that of the million who were deported, only 115,000 made it to the evacuation with Anders's army. There was a vast majority who either did not make it in time, who had to find other routes out of the Soviet Union, or while others remained in exile until the end of the war, or for the rest of their lives, and didn't actually settled in Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and did not end up leaving and rejoining, let's say, their families or to the Polish territories. And so at this point, the sort of journey out of the Soviet Union for those who'd managed it basically meant that their further journey went west. And we'll be covering that in the next webinar. However, extensive descriptions and memoirs of life in Poland and of the time of the deportations are available on the Kresy Family website. And I really encourage you to have a look at those, as every story is different. Everyone had a different experience. And it's through these experiences that you can really get a grasp of an idea of just the terrible conditions that people were exposed to, of the difficult decisions that they had to make, and also the ways in which many found a way to survive and keep on to that hope that they will be reunited with their family, that they may make it back to Poland. At this point, we'll now be moving on to the next part of our webinar, in which Janusz Zajączkowski will be taking us through the various places where you can search for records. Just to let you know, we are recording this session, and it will be available on the Kresy Family YouTube page, and the link will be placed on the Kresy Family website. And so if there is any information that you don't manage a chance to jot down, or if you'll want to come back and revisit this webinar, it will be there and it will be available to revisit. And so Janusz, I'll pass on to you to take us on with the next part of the webinar.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Marysia, for that introduction. as Marysia says, I'm Janusz Zajączkowski. I'm an engineer with no historical or research qualifications, so I don't come to this topic as an expert, but I have a great interest in the subject because my father and my grandparents were deported, as were many other members of my wider family. Sadly, I only took an interest in this subject following the death of my family, so I have very little information directly from them and their wartime experiences. However, over the last 20 or so years, through the internet and through groups such as Kresy Family, I've learned that there's a vast amount of information that one can actually find all over the place to be able to document your family's journey. So today I'll be sharing some of the most important and most useful sources of information that I found over that time. And I'll be showing some examples of how you can make use of that information. As we only have 45 minutes, my presentation will be a bit rushed, but as Marysia says, copies of the material will be available afterwards. So everything I'm going to be talking about is based around the Kresy Family website. So this is the homepage of kresyfamily.com, and I encourage people to visit that if they've not done that already. And the research links are shown here on the menu bar on the right, family research. So click on that, and then you get to the pages like this, which show you the various research sources that we have available. Today, as Marysia says, I'll be talking about the pre-World War II records. I'll be talking about maps, Polish old maps that one can find, and about deportation specifically. The second webinar will talk about evacuation, World War II, army records, etc., refugee camps, etc. So we go to the pre-World War II records, the Polish army records. On this page here, for these pre-World War II records, we have army records, the Osadnik lists, directories and newspapers. I'll go through all of these sections in turn. Lower down on the page, there's far more sources, but these are the most important and most relevant. So I'll go through these in specific detail. So we click on the link for the pre-World War II army records, and we get to the Polish Central Military Archives page. This is their page where one can search for information that they have in their archive. And the first thing is to click here on this section here, Bazy Personalne, which is personal records. Click on that, and you can now search for the records of the individual that you're looking for. So type in the surname of the individual. Here I've typed Zajączkowski, looking for my grandfather's record. And if there's lots, if you run search, clicking here Szukaj, that search. If you find lots of records, you might want to type in the actual first name. But the less you type in here, the more likely you are to be able to find a record. If you put too many entries in the various fields here, you might not find anything. So start with just the surname, see what you can find. If you need to fine-tune the information, type in the first name. So here is what comes up once you've clicked on the search. And here we've got my grandfather's record, Marysia Suchcitz. And in this field here, signatura, that's the reference numbers for the information that is available. Those are the reference fields. Now this record doesn't tell you what that information is, but it tells you that there is information about my grandfather. What you now need to do is contact the archives, and the details of how to contact them are available on our website. You email them most easily, and provide them as much information as you have. The name of the person you're searching for, their date of birth, their place of birth, parents, father's name, etc. Also your relationship to the record holder, and any reference numbers that you found here on the search page. From the archives, you'll receive a reply with a cost of how much it will cost to get these records. That cost is quite modest, but it is dependent on how many pages of information they need to copy. Once they've received your payment, they will send you copies of these records. And here I'll show you some records that I've received from my grandfather. So my grandfather, he fought in the War of Independence in 1920, or the Polish-Soviet War. And in the 1930s, he applied for the Cross of Independence. And as part of that application, he had to write up all his exploits during that 1920 war. So I had no idea what my grandfather did during that war, but here he's written it up in his own handwriting, and I managed to get hold of this record. Officer records are also available, which are much more detailed. So, you know, here at the back here is another family member. His record book, his full service record is there with photographs and all the units he served in before the war were available in that. So I really, if you have family members whose records are available, I would certainly encourage you getting hold of them. I mean, the other thing is, in these records, they have information about land that might have been awarded to the military people following the war. So moving on, the next piece of information, next set of records that we have are the military settler lists, or the Osadnik list. As I mentioned, in the 1920 Polish-Soviet War, land was allocated to soldiers that had fought in that war. In the Kresy, in the eastern borderlands. And over 10,000 soldiers were awarded such land. This land, called Osady, was settled by these soldiers and then later on their families. And these people were the first to be deported in February 1940, both the settlers and the families. What we've got linked from our website is a list of all the settlers, well, maybe not all, but the vast majority of the settlers, and the names of the Osady. So this list is available on a spreadsheet, which looks like this. You download the spreadsheet and you can search for your family name. In this case, I'm searching for the name Mazet. There's a Piotr Mazet, and here he was a settler. It only lists him, it doesn't list his family, but it shows him, it shows his rank in the army, where the settlement was in Novogródek region. And here we've got the name of the osada, of the settlement. Sometimes these changed in life. So when the land was allocated, it had one name. In life, the settlers gave the osada a different name. So on our list, we've been updating that, and Elżunia, who will be running the question and answer session, has been very active in that, in updating the list with these new names of the settlement. The great thing here is that now, by filtering on the spreadsheet here against Osada, you can find all the people in that settlement, and you can then, when you're looking for records, if you can't find them specifically for your own family member, you can maybe find some records for someone else on the list that was in the same settlement and quite likely had a very similar deportation experience from that location, maybe even to the same place of deportation in Siberia and the Soviet Union. So moving on, there's a couple of books that are really very valuable if you've got family that were these settlers, these Osadniks. They were both published by the UK-based Ognisko Rodzin Osadników, the OROK, so the society of the families of these Osadniks. The first book describes life before the war, before the Second World War, the life at these settlements, and these are memoirs written by the settlers themselves or maybe their children. So these are very first-hand descriptions. This book is only available in Polish and it's out of print. You can maybe buy it on eBay or somewhere, but it's being translated by the Kresy Family team, and there's many recollections that are already loaded onto the website, so you can find them through our kresyfamily.com website. The other book is Stalin's ethnic cleansing. Again, this is originally was written in Polish, but has been translated, and it is available to buy from Veritas Foundation. It's a fantastic book in terms of, because it describes the deportations of the Osadniks, and there's over 100 descriptions of the experience of the Osadniks. So very valuable in terms of getting a feeling of what it was like and what the deportees went through. So moving on from the Osadniks, the other sort of really valuable source of information, maybe predominantly for people that have family or people that you're searching that were based in towns or cities. These are various directories that were published in the pre-war period, maybe trade, street, phone, military or school directories. And lots of these directories have been scanned and are available in libraries or in university libraries and other online libraries around Poland and around the world. The problem is how to actually find where these libraries are, where this information is, and actually find in the specific books that you're looking for. There's a fantastic site, the Genealogy Indexer, that again is linked from our website, but here's the address. And using this indexer, they've searched all of the tool, this engine, this search engine has searched these various directories. And you can now use the indexer to search all of these directories and see if you can find a reference to your family. So here I've looked for someone from my family, Adam Buczkiewicz, and here it's come up with school yearbooks where he's mentioned in various pages. So this is just the index entry, but you click on this and you'll get through to the actual directory. Use quotation marks around names if you know, to help you find names more easily, etc. But again, some fantastic information here. You can find where people lived, if they had businesses, etc. The next source of information is the Polona .pl database. This is the Polish National Library's website, and they have access to a vast range of publications. We use it here for newspapers, but actually you search far more than just newspapers. And again, you can find incredible information that is hidden deep in some newspaper, some very maybe regional newspaper. So to use that site, you go on to polona.pl, linked on from our website. Click on this box here, Przeszukaj treść, search the content. If you don't tick this box, whatever you're searching for is only searching the actual title of the publication. So it won't search the content. So it's very important that you tick this box here, type in the name or place or whatever you're searching for. Again, use quotation marks around it to fine tune your search. Otherwise you might find a vast amount of entries. And, you know, and click search. Once you've done that, you will find various records. In this case, I found my babcia, my granny's, was mentioned in a newspaper article in 1936. You know, stuff that is quite incredible and it's very interesting to find. If you find too many entries, there's a little drop-down box here that allows you to filter the search term. So if you want to, for example, find only things between 1920 and 1939, you can set some filters for dates, maybe for where the publication was printed, etc. So look at this drop-down menu here if you want to filter names. So that's it in terms of sort of pre-war records. The next thing I'm going to show are links to maps. Here we can see, I'll start this from the bottom here. We've got this index to town and villages. If you don't know where a particular location that you're looking for is, these sites here, kami.net and this Słownik Geograficzny, which is a dictionary of a geographical dictionary. And in both these publications, you can search for settlements or places to find where they actually were in Poland, in the Kresy region. I'll talk about our Google map at the end, but I want to take you first to the Polish maps section here, which is a website where you can search pre-war Polish maps. So you click on the link to this site. It's maps here, and the very first thing to look for is the search button here. If you want to search by name, you go there. There's a maps list button here, which if you don't actually know, or you can't find the name of the place, but you know roughly where it is, you can go to the maps list section. I'm going to show you how to use both of these areas. So next, we've clicked on the search button. We type in the name of the location we're looking for. We click on the contains button here, just to make sure that in any title like these ones here, if there's more than just one name in the list, clicking on contains will help you find it more easily. So click on the contains. In this case, Pochayów, I found two entries. This is the one that I'm looking for, the top one. I click on that, and this lists all the maps where Pochayów is listed in different scales. So as you go down, the scales change from 1 in 75,000 to 1 in 100,000, and as far a bigger range of scales available, and with different levels of detail on the maps. In this case, I'm looking for. I'll look at this bottom map here in Krzemieniec. But the other thing just to say is, even just on this scale, there's a number of different editions of that map from 1925 to 1935. So I'm looking at the most recent map prior to the war. I click on the button here, and I get the details of that map record here. So this gives you more details about that specific map. And here on the right, when I've clicked on the actual map, it will download the actual map onto my PC. It might take a few minutes to do that because these are very high definition maps, but you'll get a copy of that map. And in this case here's Pochayów Nowy at the bottom of the map. It's a very large map. I've just shown a screenshot from the bottom of it. And it shows all the little settlements, all the forests, contour lines, rivers, roads, railway lines, etc. So these little places here, they won't be on any index. You might have trouble finding them on an index, but when you look at these detailed maps, you can maybe find some settlements where your family came from. So that could be very useful in your research. And this is the index sheet that I've mentioned, which if you can't find the location on one of those index sheets, but you know roughly that it's maybe close to a particular town or a location, if you click on one of these index sheets, this shows you all the parts of Poland, pre-war as well as current. You can select a particular map, you click on that, and just like before, you'll get that map. You can download it and view it. So that might help you find a specific location. I'll just highlight Google and Bing maps. These are still extremely valuable for looking for Polish locations. Even though, as Marysia said, the Kresy are no longer in Poland, and the towns will have either Ukrainian, Belarusian, or Lithuanian names. If you use Polish names on Google or on Bing, you will find those locations. So in this case, I searched for Pochayów, that same town, and here it shows it in Ukrainian Pochayów, and here in Cyrillic. So although Google is showing all the titles in the Ukrainian language, you can actually find it by just typing the Polish spelling of the town, which can be very useful. The other thing just to mention is, from here you can also get, just as normal, you can see satellite views of these locations. And it's worth looking at both Google and Bing Maps, because sometimes these satellite pictures are better or clearer for a particular location with one or the other search engine. So the detail will be different. And you can zoom in to these maps and see, you know, what the location looks like currently. So you maybe found the village pre-war. You might see what it looks like now. Are there any houses there, or is it just fields? So that could be extremely useful as well. So the final map I want to just mention is our Kresy Family Google map. This is a map where we are plotting progressively the places of deportation and places where people have come from. So here we've started plotting where the settlements, maybe the Osady, the towns, the villages where people came from in Poland. And we're showing here, like the train symbols show the destination of the deportation trains. We've got that from some lists that I'll be showing you a bit later. The red dots show the deportation sites in the Soviet Union, etc. Army locations, following the amnesty, and etc. So there's a lot of detail here. It's work in progress, but if you have some locations that are not on the map and you know the location, we would very much welcome people sending that to us in kresyfamily.com so that we can plot it on the map. Okay, so that's it in terms of the pre-war records. I'll pause for a second and ask Elżunia whether there's any questions about what I've talked about so far.
Graham Tyra is asking, are the arrows on the map accurate? In other words, for example, did families in the Vilna area end up in the east of the Soviet Union?
I think he's probably referring to those.
Yeah,
the Soviet, the map
at
of
the
the
beginning.
Soviet Union.
Yeah,
and,
the maps.
And that is just a summary. But later on, I'll show you some train records, which probably are better for being really clear, but certainly the start and end of a route. And I'll put you some railway maps where you can maybe plot those railway routes yourselves.
Okay, Mike Phillips is asking, would that website show Polish conscripts as well? I'm not really sure what he means, but Polish conscripts? So it was the Osada list we were looking at.
Yes.
Unless he's referring to core, I'm not really sure. Polish conscripts, I don't think there's any particular list for just them, is there?
I mean, there were obviously conscripts during the Second World War, particularly into the Soviet army.
Yeah, maybe that's what he means. And then there's another question here, but it's referring more to World War I. I can read to you from Sasha Międzybrzoska. My grandfather was an engineer working in Lvov in 1914 when he went to war. He was captured and spent World War I in Siberia. Unfortunately, he died of typhus on the way home while fighting with the White Russians. He isn't listed when I search in the link you first mentioned. Any thoughts where I should start?
So
that would be core as well.
That relates to records, First World War records, which you don't specialize in.
No, she said that he's not listed in that one. So apart from that, we don't really know, do we?
No, so we don't have records of World War I. I mean,
no,
it's a separate topic. We can maybe address that separately. Okay, I'm going to now quickly go through to the deportation records. And you click on the deportation record section of the website, just as I've just shown. And I'm going to talk about the IPN database first. So the IPN database it's the index of the repressed, produced by the Polish Institute of National Remembrance, Polski Instytut Pamięci Narodowej, which has a very extensive database of deportees. And there's over 250,000 names listed on this index. So it's a fraction of the number of that were actually deported, but it's still a very significant number, and it's some fantastic information. It's probably the best source of information about deportees. This index covers the, was mainly produced from the archives of Archangel, Komi, Vologda and Molotov regions, which are shown here in the circle on this slide. Other regions which are further away, like Krasnoyarsk or Komi or even Kazakhstan, there's far fewer records from those regions that are shown in this database. So if the people you're looking for were deported into the areas I mentioned at the start, then it's more likely that they'll be available on this index. It certainly is a fantastic starting point for searching for deportation records. So you click on the link here, which shows where the database is available. And this is the very first screen you will be shown. The first thing to mention is this database, unlike all the others that I've talked about today and will do, you must search with Polish characters. If there's a Polish character like the letter A with a little Cyrillic, if you don't enter that, you won't find the record. So it's very particular when you're doing the search. So make sure you type those in. And if you don't have a Polish keyboard, you might need to cut and paste those characters from somewhere when you're doing the search. So just enter a surname to start with. In this case, we've entered Majet, and you get to the next screen here, which shows you all the records that have been found. There's 74 records that have been found with Majet, and we're looking for Bronisław here. So, and it shows here, that the next field there, imię ojca, and is the name of the father, date of birth, and the final field there is where he was deported from. So in some cases they talk about where people were deported from, in other cases where they were deported to. I'm not sure why that is the case. Lower down, it shows someone that was executed in Kharkov. So this just shows some of the detail that is available here. In this case, we're going to look at Bronisław Majet, and we're going to click on his name on this list. So these are the types of records that are held on this database. So the first one on the left-hand side shows the first three fields there. And by the way, I seem to have lost my pointer, so I can't show you. I'll have to just describe where these are. It shows deportation, resettlement and departure, the first three fields, 1, 2, and 3. So he was deported in 1940, so most likely the 10th of February deportation. This one is the resettlement. So this is the arrival where he was resettled in Archangel in Kubało on the 29th of February. So that shows the journey took 19 days on those cattle or goods trains. And Vyazd, for departure, when they were released and when he departed from this settlement in the direction of Totskoye. The second box in the middle, Zofia Mączka, very sadly, for the third entry there, so it shows śmierć, her death. She died in December, the 24th of December, 1940. The third entry on the right shows a military person's record. So here we've got areszt, which is the arrest, and then the camps in which he was in which he was interned during his time in the Soviet Union. So different types of record depending on who we found. So another tip is how to find records for a whole family. In this case, we're back to the very first Bronisław Bajet's record. And what we do is in the search field, we enter both his surname and the place of deportation. We cut and paste that Kubało in the miejsce represji, place of repression field, and do a search, run search from that. And that highlights all 9 members of the family that were deported to that location. So again, here, this way you can easily pinpoint from the whole list of people with that same surname, the whole family on one screen, and you can look at their individual deportation details. So, you know, whether they survived, whether they all arrived and left at the same time. Okay, the next page here is very important, is to mention the misspelling of names on the database. Because Polish surnames were translated into Russian, into Cyrillic, when they were recorded by the Soviets, and then retranslated back from Russian into Polish, lots of errors have crept in. So quite often it's difficult to find the name on the database, even though it's there. So in this case, we've got Paździerska as the name, but it's recorded as Pozderska, and it's a mistranslation as it's gone backwards and forwards. So how do you find that? Well, maybe we look for every name with a P on it, and we select that little P, that button with a P alongside the surname in the middle there. And if we click on that, anything we search, it will be looking for any name with that, which begins with a P. But there's obviously hundreds or tens of thousands of surnames with P, so that's no use. So we need to put in another field. So maybe we put the first name in, and we'll try to find someone in the family that has a as rarer type of first name as possible. So we wouldn't search for Jan P, because there's lots of Jan Ps. We'll get hundreds of those entries. But we know that in this family there was a Victoria, so we searched for Victoria P, and here we found 41 records on the right. And by scrolling through those records, we found Victoria Pozderska, which is similar to Paździerska. We can see that her father's name was Józef. She was born in 1903. We did know that she was the right person we were looking for. So that might be something quite handy if you can't find a family record. The final thing to mention in terms of the database and link to that database are these maps of the settlements in Archangel and Vologda regions. These maps are available on our website. They were published by IPN, and they showed the places of these Specposovsky, the settlement camps in these regions. The numbers have no meaning other than to identify where on the map that particular location is located. I've mentioned that on our site we've got all sorts of other deportation lists. I'm not going to go through those in detail today, but here this shows you those some of those lists that are available. And I'd also particularly highlight there's this website, PolishExilesOfWorldWar2.org. It's our colleagues in Canada. They've got this website, and it's got a very, very comprehensive list of lists that might be useful. So once you found the name of your of a settlement where your family were deported to, it's very useful to use Google to search for that name. And very often you'll find other reports of other people or descriptions of life in these settlements. So in this case, I've searched for Ukhtym, which is where my family were deported. It's a settlement in the middle of Archangel, very far away from anywhere. The first thing is you get are hotels, which obviously there aren't any hotels there, there's nothing there. But these are just standard websites. So you just scroll through these websites and weather sites until you do find some relevant information. And here are 3 sites, 3 records that I found about Ukhtym. 3 different people have written about their experiences, some from Poland, some in the UK. I even found, based on this, these sorts of records. Once I knew where my family were deported, I found a family that shared a barrack with my family, and I knew my family extremely well. I had no idea about them until this you know, I found the name of the settlement, and I found the name through Google. So that could well be a useful way of finding something. So I mentioned train records, and someone was asking whether those routes were accurate. Through our website, there's a list of trains, the deportation trains. Again, it's not 100% complete, but it's a good list. There's plenty of information there, and these are records that were found in KGB archives around the Soviet, or post-Soviet Union, Russia, and these lists show both the departure point and the arrival point for these trains. The very first column shows a date. In this case here, I've got the 1st of February 1940. These aren't necessarily the date the train actually was loaded by the deportees, but it was the dates when the train was assembled. So prior to loading with people. And so the first section there shows you the departure point, and then the second section shows the arrival station. Obviously it's maybe not obvious. Not everyone started their journey at the beginning of one of these train routes and didn't always end at the destination. Sometimes people were put onto trains part way through the journey, and they were removed from the train to settlements along the route. So you might not necessarily find the actual destination station, but in many cases, people did go right from the start to the end. This list also shows the number of people on that particular train, the army regiment, the Soviet army regiments that were actually guarding the train, and even the name of the officer in charge of that deportation train. Okay, moving on, the Hoover Institute collection. This is a very, again, very valuable collection if you can find records from the people you're searching for. Following deportation and release from deportation and evacuation to the Middle East, deportees were encouraged to document their experiences, and thousands, in fact tens of thousands of reports were written by the deportees when they were in the Middle East. And these are stored at the Hoover archives at Stanford University. These have been digitized and are available online in the Polish National Archives. It's a bit tricky to find the relevant records, but I've got a few hints and tips of how to find them. So the first thing is, you go to our website, you go to the section where the Hoover Archive records are shown, and you click on, there's two index sheets. There's reports that are written by school children, and there's reports written by adults. There's 1,700 school children essays, over 10,000 reports by adults. So we've got indexes which show the majority of the reports that are available in this archive. And you can click on these links and see if you're the people you're looking for did write a report, an essay or a report. And the first thing I'm showing here is the spreadsheet showing the school children essays. And you can sort it by name, search by name. The next column there shows the school that they attended. So these were the various schools in the Middle East, both for boys and girls. And then there's a link to the very first section in the online archives. It doesn't link you to the specific report. It shows you, takes you to the beginning of where the reports are located. Then sadly, you need to scroll through one by one through the various reports until you find the one you're looking for. And in each one of these sections, there might be 100 or so reports that you might need to go through. But if you do that, and if you can find the people you're looking for on the list, I would absolutely say it's worth the effort of scrolling through these records until you find them, because these are reports written very soon after the deportation, and they describe, in this case, in the children's eyes, what they went through, how they were taken from their homes, what happens in Siberia, how they were released. And some reports are very short, some are very long, some are, but all of them are fascinating. So if you're lucky enough to have a family member that has written something, that would be very worthwhile hunting out. The adult reports, there's an index. This is less granular. So, I mean, the good thing is that you can search the index and see if someone you're looking for has actually written a report. And then in the final column is the Hoover box. This is the box in the Hoover Institute where these reports are located. So that gives you a clue of where to look for them. It's still not as straightforward as that. So for the adults, there's a separate index that Mark Ostrowski, who's on this call, he very, well, it's quite a laborious piece of work, but very kindly went through the archives and documented how best to find particular sections of these reports. And so we've got a copy of this index. And the very first section of that are the personal index cards. And again, it's good if you're looking for someone you go down to the section with their name, where their surname begins. For example, you know, if it's with G, you go to the G section, click on the link, and that will take you to the relevant part in the archive. And then you can go through the index cards, which look like here on the right-hand side. You'll go through each section by section on the archive until you find the index card that you're looking for. This will have a reference number, in this case 14506/53. The first digits there will take you to the relevant part of the archive. But it's not even as simple as that. Once you have the number, the archives are split into a number of sections. So that 14506 might be in a number of sections in the archives. So, but at least with these indexes, specifically for the adults, you've got clues of where to look for them in the archives. And here I'm showing further down in Mark's index that you've got two completely different sections with different numbering where you might find a record. Here on the left, I'm showing a particular report that someone had written. This is an adult's version, and you know it's handwritten. Some have been transcribed and typewritten, but as I said before, extremely valuable if you can find a record of someone that you know, or for that matter, someone that was deported to the same settlement. Sometimes they, in particular, the children's essays are very good on that because they describe life at the settlement. So even if you can't find your family member's record, you might be able to find some other child that was at that settlement. So using the IPN records and these records, you might be able to cross-match between the two. If you can't find the records, use the Kresy Family group. And you know, Marysia's already talked about our website and Facebook group, but use the group to help, or you can write or email the Hoover archives directly for them to help you locate the specific files. Okay, we're sort of final I've said most of the records that are available are in the sort of northern Siberian or northern Soviet areas. There's very little in Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, but we have found some records from Uzbekistan. These are in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where they've received copies of records of Jewish refugees from the state archives of Uzbekistan. So these are records from Tashkent, and there's thousands of records there. Somehow they are only Jewish records rather than all records. I'm not sure how they've been filtered. I've searched for my surname, and there is a, you know, Sofia Zajączkowska sort of spelling all mixed up, but it's not anyone that I actually, you know, is close relatives or anything, but you may find that archive useful. There's also a file with 540 Poles repressed in Uzbekistan that's available in National Archives, and that website I've mentioned before, Polish Exiles of World War II, has a copy of that file. So sadly, there's very little from these regions. So if your family were deported there, there's not that much available, but it's worth searching out for these records. People very often ask about record of deaths during the deportations. Sadly, records of people prior to arriving at a deportation place, there are no records. I've shown on the Karta index that people do, if they died in the settlement and they were recorded, but that might well be visible. On the journey south after the amnesty, again, great quantities died on that journey. They were taken from the trains and buried where they died. There's very few records of that. But there is a very interesting book that was published by the Polish Institute Sikorski Museum in London in 1952. And this has records of graves of military personnel. So once they joined the army in the middle, in Central and Southern Soviet Union, and they died, their records of where they were buried are in this book, and that's available from the Sikorski Museum website. That website is currently going through a renovation, so currently it's not all of these records are easily to find, but they will be available from the summer when the new site becomes available. And of course, anyone visiting London should, COVID permitting, visit the museum where you can actually find lots of physical artifacts and not just records, paper records. It's a fascinating place to visit. So finally, I just want to highlight the Facebook group and our website. Many people on this call will already know about the Facebook group, Kresy Family. There's over 1,000 members. You can share information, ask for help with research and anything like that. We welcome anyone to join that. Similarly, there's our kresyfamily.com website, and we welcome people to join us formally and support us in our work. And again, there's a link at the bottom of our website to join. So that's it in terms of the formal presentation. We've got maybe 15 minutes or so for questions and answers. So I'll ask Elżunia to select some questions that might have cropped up.
A lot of questions have come up, but I think people have got the answers as we've been going along. Somebody was, Bożena Firth was asking, my grandfather was a forester. Nearest train station to my family's village was probably Swisloci. Whoops, that's my bag. My grandfather worked in a gold mine, but I don't know where. Does a list of people who worked in gold mines exist?
So let's ask the first one about the grandfather that was a forester. That I think when Marysia talked about the deportations, foresters were in the very first deportation, and quite a lot of them would have been deported maybe in some of those regions that are available in the Karta, in the IPN database that I talked about. So that would be. Yeah,
she says that he was. Yeah, she says he was deported on the 10th of February to Chelyabinsk.
Right.
And she wonders if there was a list of people who worked in the gold mines, but not as far as I know.
Okay, so yeah, so we don't have lists of gold mines, and in fact, gold mines were probably not so visible on the IPN database, but it's certainly worth searching that.
Yeah, we don't have any lists of names anywhere, really.
No.
Not specifically.
Just one thing about lists. I mean, these lists were created at the places of deportation or in the prisons. So all over the Soviet Union, these lists were available in various archives. But the trick is to get access to these lists. And early in the sort of Glasnost era, the Russian Memorial Society did secure access to many of these archives, but things have changed, and currently it's very difficult to get hold of, get access to these archives. So what was made available in the 1990s or 2000s is what's available on these databases currently. But it's believed that there's much information is still sitting in archives, but it's just not being made available to the general public. But one day, maybe they will become available. So there is hope.
Yeah. Martin Stepek asks 2 questions. My dad and his sisters told me that many of the letters they sent back to Poland didn't arrive, presumably censored. Do we know if these are still in files in Russia? And if so, how we might access or retrieve them?
So I think so the answer is I have no idea.
No idea,
I would
no.
be surprised if letters, but who knows? All sorts of things may be available.
Yeah.
I've not come across that, but it's an interesting comment. I mean, it surprised me massively is that there was a postal and packages were being delivered to people in these very, very far and remote settlements. So I know my family were receiving food and seeds from Poland, from their village where they came from.
Yeah, mine did
during
too.
the
Yes.
deportation.
Yeah.
So that is an interesting fact, and in fact you can read about it in those various memoirs that I've talked about that are available both on our website and in that book, where people do describe correspondence and indeed parcels being delivered to the deportees. But whether parcels or letters that got lost or were censored, I've not come across anyone finding such records.
No. Okay, second question, he says, are there any medical records of individuals from hospitals and camps in Persia, Pahlavi, Tehran?
So again, that's something that we will be talking about in the second webinar.
Yeah.
But
yes, there is a link to the Red Cross Hospital in Tehran, actually. I can post it in the next one.
Great. And of course, there's extensive reports that were written by the British military doctors that were very much involved in receiving the deportees when they arrived in Pahlavi. But we'll cover this in more detail at the next 19th of June seminar.
It's more, let me see if anybody said anything more here. Oh. Oh, now there's a whole lot of stuff come up while we've been talking. Is there a list of prisoners at each Siberian camp? I'm unable to locate where my family was taken and where they lived prior to deportation. Each Siberian camp. Well, that's on the index, isn't it?
Yeah.
You talked about that.
So to help with specific searches, I really do encourage people to join our Facebook Facebook group and post these sorts of questions with some specific detail, some name of family, surnames, names, what they do know, and that there's people, as I said, there's over 1,000 members. These people are very helpful and either will help search through the archives or may have some specific information that will be of use. So, but I think the key thing to mention is there is a vast amount of information available and it's just a matter of finding it. But and if you're lucky, you'll find it. In other cases, it's less so, but it's certainly worth looking for it. Okay, Elżunia, is there maybe one more last question before we sort of...
Somebody asked the difference between arrested rather than deported.
So, okay, so that is a very good question. So most deportees, they weren't arrested. There was no criminal case against them. They were just taken and put on a train and taken for resettlement. There was no court case, no matter how sort of or anything at all. So the vast majority of the deportees, they were not arrested. There was no criminal case against them. However, if there were people that were arrested, so for example, people that were caught for carrying out anti-Soviet activities, maybe patriotic or resistance work, people were arrested for those sorts of activities. They were tried, maybe in kangaroo courts, but they were tried and sent to gulags. These would be prisons rather than villages in the middle of nowhere, where, you know, the resettlement camps, the specposovki, where people were free in those camps. There were no guards as such, whereas prison camps, the gulags, were very different, and probably a harsher existence. So these were two different routes that were followed, the majority without arrest, but there were those that were arrested too.
And the prisoners of war were also counted as arrested and sentenced and sent to the gulags.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think we'll just finish off. We've got a few more slides that Marysia will lead us through. Thank you very much for that, Elżunia.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Janusz. And just to give a heads up about the next webinar, which will be taking place at 4 p.m. That's British summertime, on Saturday, the 19th of June. And in the second webinar, we will be covering the evacuation from the USSR to Persia, military units formed by the deportees, and this will include Army, Navy, Air Force, cadets, the refugee camps, which were found in Africa, India, New Zealand, as well as Mexico, as well as resettlement following the end of the war. And so if you're still looking for information about your family or interested persons, and you're sort of wondering where they went, or what journey they took following the amnesty and the evacuation out of the USSR, please do join us on Saturday the 19th of June, where we'll be going through those topics and where you can find records in regards to that next part of the journey. And that brings us to a close. Thank you so much to all of you for joining us today. We appreciate that there's been a lot of information, and so I would just like to reassure everyone that this has been recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Kresy Family YouTube, and the link to that will you can find that through the Kresy Family website or through the Kresy Family Facebook group, and so please do keep your eyes peeled for that. And we'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the Polish Embassy in London for all of their support, and for including this as part of their Polish Heritage Days project. And thank you for all Polish organisations who have been supporting us with comms and sharing this event far and wide. And finally, I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank the Kresy Family Committee and friends, and specifically the committee who are with us today and have worked very hard to put together this presentation and webinar. So that's John Binks, Irena Bojanowska, Elżunia Olsson, Nikola Paździerska, Tadek Wojewódka, Mirka Wojnar, and obviously Janusz, thank you so much for the presentation and all the information that you've shared with us. And also a special shout out to Mark Kosowski, as Janusz mentioned, who's put in a lot of work to create those indexes, which hopefully many of you will be able to use and find very useful.
And of course, we thank you, Marysia, for the fantastic introduction and all your help on this webinar. So thank you from us all as well.
Thank you for inviting me. And it's probably just worth saying that the Kresy Family Group, all of the information that's there is thanks to the many contributions over many, many years of all of its members. And so I really do encourage you to get involved, to share sort of your family archives, and it's through those links and those contacts that I think a lot of this information sort of comes forward, and people find sort of where their family maybe was deported to, or find alternative ways to find sort of records and information. And so thank you to all of the contributors over the years who have helped build up the website to make it what it is now. And I guess with that, I'd like to wish you all a lovely rest of the afternoon and evening. And I really do hope to see many of you in our second webinar, which will be taking place next month.